Hey everybody, my name is Maverick Knowles. I'm the president and co-founder over at Legacy EV, and I'm honored to be your host of this stage today for the electrification topics at the FutureTech live stage. I know in this FutureTech area this year, we've got a bunch of alternative fuels that we're gonna be talking about. So I'm excited to bring to you some electrification topics. I'm gonna start us out with just a fairly short presentation on what electrification looks like, how it could impact your business, and what you can do about it. Later today at 1 o'clock, we're going to have a fireside chat with Apple Diap from the Black Eyed Peas on the next generation of hot rodders with my business partner, Rob Ward, CEO of Legacy EV. And then at 2 o'clock, we're gonna have a panel with some industry experts from multiple industry-leading manufacturers right here on this stage, talking about the technology of electrification of the future and how we get there. So I'm pretty excited about all those channels. Happy to have been able to help curate those for you guys today. I think it's gonna be a pretty great day talking about electrification. So excited to get us kicked off here with this first topic of how electrification will affect your business and what you can do about it. I'll start out by saying the precursor. I have some pretty dope slides that I was gonna put up. We don't have a TV that I can share with you. So I'm gonna be looking at my computer a little bit because I was counting on being able to look at those as I'm talking. So bear with me if you see me looking at my screen while we're talking about this. But let's start out by just talking about the impact of electrification. I'm gonna give away a little bit of info for this next question before I do. This number is less than 10, but I want you guys to show me that are here on your hands. What do you think the vehicles in operation that are battery electric vehicles, percentage of vehicles on the road is today? So percentage of BEVs in operation on the road today. Show me on your hands. It's gonna be less than 10, so you can show me on your two hands. What do you think the percentage is? See some twos, sevens, fours. It is less than 10. You can show it on one hand, threes. We just passed 1% last year, so we're still hovering right around 1%, which is shocking to most people when we give this stat, because we hear about EVs all the time, right? They're in the news, we're seeing them all around the show, and that technology is growing in its presence in our industry. In fact, we know that OEs, governments, companies that aren't even in the automotive industry are making commitments to electrification, fully electric by 2050. You hear it all over the place. We know that that shift is happening, but we're still today not seeing a ton of EVs on the road. But we know that by 2035, there's been projections that it'll be 35% of all new vehicle sales will be EV. So I share this with you as a start just to frame the idea that we're still at about 1% right now, but by 2035, we're gonna be at about 35% of new sales. So we're just still at the base of this like hockey stick style growth curve of electrification technology in this space, which is really important to understand as we're going throughout this presentation. So my goal today is to frame for you kind of what does this look like for the automotive industry. Now, I am by no means a history expert or even an engineer, but what I do know is electrification. I co-founded Legacy EV, and I understand the impact of electrification on businesses. Our goal as a company is to support automotive businesses embrace this transition and take advantage of the opportunities that it does provide. So I'm going to talk about that today. There's over 4.5 million jobs in the automotive industry, from retail to manufacturing, service, and repair. So we know that it's estimated, the Economic Policy Institute said that by 50% of domestic sales of EVs will lose 75,000 manufacturing jobs in the US. That's an Economic Policy Institute estimation. California estimates that they'll lose about 32,000 jobs for mechanics over the next 15 years due to electrification. So these are headlines that we're seeing that should cause some caution and pause about electrification and what it's gonna do to our industry. But it's not gonna be all doom and gloom. I'm gonna come back to some positives here and what we can do about it here by the end of the presentation. But I just wanna frame this for us. One nugget I'll give you of some positive potential job opportunities. We're bringing an estimated 580,000 new manufacturing jobs in just the battery technology manufacturing industry to the US also over the next decade. So I have some funny examples of when we've seen industry transitions of technology in the past that I want to share with you guys to kind of frame the picture of what can we learn from the past to understand where we're going in the future. So the first example is one of the top 5 largest industries in the early 1800s just died like almost overnight. And it was the introduction of this new technology that made this industry kind of disappear, and it was whaling. Whaling was one of the top 5 largest industries in the early 1800s, and the introduction of kerosene, fossil fuel, petroleum-based fuels made it so whaling, even though it had been innovated for thousands and thousands of years, the harpoon gun had just came out, and there were all new kinds of ways to efficiently capture whales. Couldn't keep up with the alternatives that fossil fuels provided. So fossil fuels ended up ending the whaling industry. So the whales, we can say thank you to fossil fuels for saving our whales. That's not the only thing that fossil fuels saved. New York had arguably one of its biggest pollution crises in 1894. And no idea how New York was going to fix this. It was the horse manure crisis of 1894. Horses were the main form of transportation. I think it's 100,000 horses producing 2.8 million pounds of manure in that city a year. Dead corpses for horses on the side of the road. Nobody knew what to do. We couldn't keep up with it. It was causing disease everywhere. And then introduction of the automobile. And all of a sudden we don't have horse manure. But that is the end of the horse and carriage era for main transportation. Although there was some resistance to it in the beginning, right? Before the Ford vehicle hit production, it was quite a bit more expensive than your horse and carriage. And so there was resistance to it on prices. There was also resistance to it on safety. I have some great slides here that would show you images of some of the protests around the automobile back in the day. But children were dying on the streets because they're used to being able to play and move around horses and carriages, and that just wasn't as possible with the automobile on the road. So even new technologies, really since they've been introduced into markets and into industries, have been met with resistance no matter the benefits that they may provide. It's always two sides of the same coin, right? For every positive we introduce, there's going to be some negative impacts that we got to think about and be cognizant of how to address them. So when we talk about impact of electrification, if we're just looking at the potential negative sides of that coin, we're looking at potential job loss. Right? We're looking at potentially lack of access to OE parts to be able to continue doing business in the automotive industry without access to the electrification components you need. And third, that we hear all the time is like the loss of this automotive heritage, right? We've been innovating on the fuel-based combustion systems for 100 years. And it's been family traditions and legacy businesses that have been able to enjoy the fruits of that very legacy for 100 years. And so with that in mind, the thought I've had recently is we've had 100 years to learn from how we did things in the automotive industry. And we're facing the precipice of this introduction of new technology. What can we learn from the last 100 years in automotive to make sure that as electrification is introduced into this industry, we do it in the right way that can both honor the past, the legacy of these automotive companies and these businesses that have been doing automotive work for hundred years, but also protect the future. Like make sure that this industry represents what we know and love about it as we move into the next century. So, what are some lessons we can learn from some of these prior transitions that I talked about? One is we've got the opportunity to build some American manufacturing here with the introduction of electric vehicle technology. Two is we've got the opportunity to build a new generation of hot rodders that have interest in new technology that didn't exist in the space before, and we have an opportunity to capture more market as the automotive aftermarket with that new generation that maybe wasn't interested in the traditional gas-powered system, but there's a new type of hot rodding that is emerging. And we can keep what we love by being intentional about the steps that we take over the next few decades to make sure that the heritage of the automotive industry lives on. Fourth, we have to build a talent pipeline to make sure everybody has access to training to take part in this industry. And we can be a part of industry-driven policy and regulation, and we can get access to the parts that we need to continue doing work in this space as it transitions and adopts electric technology. So I'm going to talk about each of those a little bit more in depth over the next couple minutes. When I talk about like growing consumer demand and what that looks like for our industry and our space, I was talking with a friend the other day who works at a Dodge dealership, and they get in their EVs for their allocation of vehicles, and they're gone like within a few days. But the gas-powered cars are the ones that are still there. They're not selling at the same rate as electric vehicles, and we could talk probably until we're all red in the face about what is the reason for that and what are the economic and governmental impacts that make that happen. But reality is we're seeing a lot of consumer-driven choices that are making electrification a popular choice. An example I like to give, being involved in the aftermarket, is we as aftermarket companies don't get tax subsidies or extra funding to do these kind of electrification projects. These cars you see here that are converted didn't get $7,500 as a tax credit to do what they're doing. But this space has doubled every year. I've watched it, I've walked around, and this FutureTech studio is growing and growing and growing, and that's driven by the consumer. And so we have this opportunity to capture a new aspect of the market that maybe wasn't previously interested, which is a big opportunity that we can all take advantage of. And when I talk about building a new generation of hot rodders, I like what my friend Eddie over at Revel has done. He talked with Gary Hooker, founder of Hooker Headers, who is the traditional hot rodder. And Eddie's got a video on YouTube. You should check it out if you haven't seen it, just about Gary's thoughts on electrification. And he views it as this new era of hot rodding. It's hot rodding 2.0. It's what was done in the early days of hot rodding, but now for this next generation, which means we can still excite the traditional automotive enthusiasts about what hot rodding can look like in this next generation. But I also like to look at, there's a YouTuber that I was a teacher for 5 years. All my students were obsessed with this YouTuber, Marques Brownlee. He does a bunch of tech reviews. He's one of the biggest tech reviewers on YouTube, 17.8 million subscribers on YouTube. And he's a tech guy. He reviews iPhones and all this stuff. And then he just got into EVs because there's tech in there that he's really interested in. And so he started reviewing electric cars, and that channel has now blown up. And he's just excited this whole new generation of automotive enthusiasts that previously were interested in phones, computers, and technology. And we're seeing those students now come to trainings to learn about electric vehicles and getting their hands on components and wrenching on these vehicles and understanding how can I tune an electric vehicle in this modern age of hot rodding. It's really exciting. Marquez, in one of his videos, you'd see this picture, a quote on the screen if it was there, but he says, I have a new favorite two-door electric vehicle, and it's the Ford Illuminator, the F100 truck that was converted, which when you think about all the technology that's out there and these classic cars that we drive around in, they're still really loud. You know, the floor isn't dampened. You hear the steel rattling on those doors, the old cars as you're going, but he'd rather have that experience connecting to that automotive heritage driving the F100 than he would the brand new Rimac or whatever is the coolest thing out there. So I thought that was pretty exciting to see this like very different demographic from, you know, Marques Brownlee, this young YouTuber just talking about tech and Android phones and iPhones, to Gary Hooker, who is considered, you know, one of the original hot rodders. All can embrace electrification to help grow this industry for everyone. And then when I talk about being intentional about keeping what we love from this automotive heritage, you know, we have an opportunity to keep the legacy of these automotive vehicles and install electric powertrains in them and keep them going as electric vehicles. But you'll also see, we're going to do this over in the Legacy EV booth today in about 20 minutes. We're going to convert a car from gas to electric that we've already converted from gas to electric once. So we swap this vehicle back from gas to electric, back to gas to electric, because you can still maintain the legacy of these vehicles, but also provide them this new powertrain alternative that's really fun, and you can do burnouts all day, and it's a great experience to drive. And so just because we have the electrification option doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it. We can build these vehicles in a way where we can convert them back to gas, and we can have fun, hot rodding, tinkering, doing everything we want with both types of fuel technologies. And so the third piece I talked about for what we can do to kind of embrace this transition, or what you can do when we're looking at the impact of electrification, is one is get trained. There's training out there that exists. We've got 2 training booths over there in this space today on FutureTech. There's Switch Vehicles back there that is also doing electric vehicle training. Legacy EV over there, which is my company. We've got a booth on electric vehicle training, iCar. There's lots of opportunities to get trained. And so getting involved, starting to learn about this technology and understand how it works is a good first and crucial step to being able to partake in this industry. And then fourth point is we can get involved in conversations around industry-driven policy and regulation. This is one of the learnings that I've had over the last 100 years of the automotive industry is self-governance can play a huge role in making sure that we get to set the rules for how we interact with this technology. So one thing that I've actually been a part of doing is establishing a nonprofit organization called the Electric Vehicle Technician Education Council that has developed 150 standards of what it means to be a knowledgeable EV technician. And we had those developed by 12 industry-leading manufacturers that you see in this space today that are working with builders, that are working with manufacturers, and setting those standards and the rules for what it means to be a knowledgeable technician, so we get to do it. It's not a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach where we're building these standards. In fact, we're going to do a press conference on that today at 4 o'clock in the Legacy EV booth if you want to come see and be a part of that. But we also built into the website for EVTech an opportunity to give your own feedback on the standards and have your voice heard, so we can make sure that we're building standards that are relevant to the industry. And I think that's the beautiful part about starting these conversations now, having learned from these 100 years of the automotive industry. We get to build the new set of rules that we want to operate by. And we're going to see that happen again with products, new batteries that are coming out. We've got manufacturers working to develop battery standards to make sure that batteries are built safe, but they're coming from the manufacturers and the builders, not from governmental entities that don't understand the technology or how to work with it. And the fifth and final point is you can actually electrify today. You can take part in the electrification industry because the technology is there. You'll see booths out there from Hypercraft to Torque Trends to AEM to Amper EV, Revolt Systems, Legacy EV. There's a ton. I apologize to any that I didn't name, all offering electrification products. So access to the parts is there today and it's ready for you. And you can partake in the industry by getting trained, making sure your voice is heard on the policy and the standards that we want to live by for the next 100 years, and getting your hands on some of these components and starting to do it in your own business, whether it's modifying OEM electric vehicles or converting gas cars to electric. There's tons of opportunity to learn about electrification technology, and we'll be able to continue to talk about that today on this very stage about inspiring the next generation, today at 1 o'clock. And then at 2 o'clock, we'll talk about some technology. We've got some really cool things that the manufacturers that are in this space are going to be sharing. So honored to be able to share this stage with all of you. Honored that SEMA invited me to do this. Again, my name is Maverick Knowles, president and co-founder at Legacy EV. I'm going to hang out right over here for a little bit. If you want to come talk to me after the session, I've got some business cards. Be happy to meet any of you. I also have a very knowledgeable team over in our booth that can speak to the technical way better than I can, as well as our educational program. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to go chat with them. Thank you, everybody, for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you later today at 1 o'clock.